peace and food security are interlinked, Caroline. Maybe you start with sharing some of the points of your research and some of the recommendations for different types of actors, national governments, international cooperation, but also, of course, for the local level. Please, floor is yours, Caroline.
Thank you so much. Thank you, and I'm really happy to be on this panel. So we've been doing research on the intersection between food security, violent conflict, and peace. So specifically the research, the two-way relationship between conflict and hunger. That is the way violent conflict drives food insecurity, and how heightened food insecurity can trigger conflict. But also importantly, the potential for food security interventions to generate the conditions conducive to peace. Before going into our research in a bit more detail, I just really want to emphasize the gravity of the situation. We heard in a few panels today the figures, and it has really been a drastic increase from around 80 million people acutely food insecure in 2015, which is still a huge number, but last year, end of last year, it reached almost 200. And then this year, we risk coming all the way up to 350 million people acutely food insecure. And violent conflict is the main driver of this increase, followed, of course, by climate change, cost of living crisis, and COVID. And all these drivers, they also interlink, and they reinforce each other. We know, for example, that climate change is a risk multiplier of conflict. So it's a really devastating situation. So I want to talk today about the research that we've been doing, and in particular the research that we've been doing together with the World Food Programme. And a really important part of this research is that together with the World Food Programme, we engage with local conflict-affected communities to really understand in detail and context how the hunger-conflict relationship play out and affect these countries or communities. And the first point I want to make is, and it's been really evident in our research, is the importance of context. And I want to illustrate that by presenting some of our research finding. If we start with looking at how violent conflict drives food insecurity, this is really a largely uncontested relationship. And one of the main pathways through which this happened include how conflict actors attacked food production, distribution channels, marketing sites, leading to less food being produced, available, and accessible. One of the countries where we've been exploring these pathways is South Sudan, which is a very complex setting. It has very high levels of food insecurity, long-running armed conflict, which is driven by violent conflict and also climate change. And a really interesting finding coming out from the research there was how World Food Programme has been able to help to restore traditional conflict resolution mechanisms that used to regulate community-level violence, but has over the years, over the decades of armed conflict, become eroded. But by restoring this mechanism, it has also led to a reduction in direct violence at the community level. So in the short term, you see a sort of a reduction in violence, local, but also in the long time, sort of generating spaces for local peace-building activities. Part of the reason it's been able to do this is because it's been present for so long on the ground, so reaching some of the most conflict-affected areas and really gained the trust of the people. And linked to this, it has a really solid understanding of the conflict, which of course is really necessary if you're going to work on the drivers of violence and conflict. And it might sound very obvious, but we also do see that not all actors have this contextual knowledge. And then importantly, by partnering, so really leveraging its programming, knowledge, and access to support, facilitate, and enhance other more direct peace-building initiatives. Another pathway I want to mention, which is slightly more contested, is how food insecurity can influence some of the push and pull factors of recruitment into armed groups, non-state armed groups. Of course, the first thing to say here, the decision to join an armed group depends, of course, on an intricate combination of contextual, structural, and subjective factors, but food insecurity play a role. And we've seen this in countries as diverse as Nigeria, El Salvador, Colombia, just to name a few. And what we found in these countries was how food security interventions address some of the needs-based grievances that armed groups, non-state armed groups, seeks to capitalize on and in seeking to fill their ranks. And of course, how this happens, it differs across and between countries. But if we look, for example, at northeast Nigeria, their research showed quite clearly how Boko Haram's recruitment tactics are changing. So while previously, as a jihadist group, Boko Haram would kind of promise a fighter paradise if he was killed in battle, but now they're offering support to him and his family while he lives. And as violence and hunger escalates, this promise of better welfare, including the provision of food, has been a successful strategy to recruit members. Few of the people interviewed stated outright that food aid prevented them from turning to Boko Haram, but many did speak of how food aid had reduced their struggle for survival, which is something that armed group seeks to capitalize on, as mentioned. Several also said that being able to eat allows your mind to better function and to think about options, including questioning ideologies. If we look at Colombia, which is a very different settings, there it was clear how livelihood interventions helped demobilized former FARC fighters to maintain their motivation to remain in the reintegration process. And this in a point of time where the reintegration process was really threatened by lack of resources and even political commitment. So against these dynamics and findings coming out from other countries, which of course I haven't touched on here, it's possible to conclude that humanitarian aid, including food aid, can influence a person at a specific point of time whether or not to seek out an armed group as a means of survival. Common to all these examples mentioned, which also brings me to my second point and linked to the importance of context, is the need to listen carefully to local voices, to what they have to say about the problems and the possibilities on the ground. So international actors like the World Food Programme and of course others that seek to contribute to peace need to recognize that peace is perceived differently by different people in different contexts, in different cultures at different points of time. It is often the case that peace building tend to focus on macro level technocratic interventions around state building and good governance, which of course are extremely important, but equally important is to consistently engage with localized everyday peace-building efforts. And that brings me to my third and final point, which is we need better ways of connecting these different levels. So better ways to translate the very contextual evidence into broader policy and action. So in sum, while the challenges are enormous and the outlook is rather bleak, there are numerous promising initiatives that are starting to break the vicious circle between food security and violent conflict, and starting to generate the conditions conducive to peace. We've been able to see some of them in our work with the World Food Programme, and what these tend to have in common is that they are local level initiatives that recognize the importance of context and local voices. So strengthening these efforts, scaling them up, connecting them to broader national and regional efforts are really crucial, and this of course required concerted efforts between local, national and regional, global, humanitarian development and peace-building actors, and of course government and donors as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Caroline, for opening with these strong words. So it's about breaking the vicious cycles between food insecurity, conflict, further aggravating conflict and food insecurity, and looking at the local dynamics. So Madame la Maire, I would like to ask you, and we spoke about this before, if we later on need translation for your intervention, we're happy, and we have Anna and Alexandre. What do you see specifically? What are the local dynamics, and how can, as Caroline was saying, programming needs to be sensitive to these contexts? How does it work well also? What are your examples how these local dynamics can be taken into consideration for programming and for the work?
Thank you, Catherine. I don't know, you want me to speak in English, or my English is not very good.
Okay, Anna,
if you want me to...
Spontaneous translation, I think it makes it easier et pour vous, pour être confortable avec, dans ce débat. Vous pouvez parler bien sûr en français et on va suivre la discussion après en anglais. Donc, merci pour traduire, Anna.
Merci beaucoup, merci de m'avoir donné la parole. Moi, je m'appelle Madame Aminata Atinen Hassan. Je suis maire de la commune rurale de Faray. Pardon. Pardon. Faray, c'est ma commune, c'est une des communes du département de Dosso, dans la région de Dosso, et on est à 220 km de la capitale qui est Niamey, la capitale du Niger qui est Niamey. Et donc, on est 14 élus dans ma commune, 14 élus, 14 conseillers. Et parmi ces 14, nous sommes 5 femmes, dont j'ai été élue maire de la commune rurale de Faray. Et pour vous faire aussi... OK.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for being here. I'm the mayor of Faray. Is it Faray? Is that right?
Faray.
In Dosso, in Niger, which is 200 kilometers away from the capital of Niamey. And there's 14 representatives in the council, and 5 of them being women.
Donc, comme je viens de le dire, nous sommes 14 élus, 14 conseillers, et j'étais élue maire au titre de la commune de Faray. Et je suis aussi la première femme maire du département de Dosso.
As I said, there's 14 representatives of 14 councillors, 5 of them being women, and she's the first woman to become a mayor in Dosso.
Et je voulais aussi remercier le projet Frexis qui, à travers GIZ, qui a facilité l'initiative d'être dans ma commune.
And I would like to thank the Frexis project for being there and for the initiative and the work being done in my town in Dosso.
Oui, c'est grâce à Frexis que je peux dire que je suis ici. C'est grâce au projet Frexis qui m'a donné l'opportunité d'être ici parmi vous et de m'exprimer aussi parmi vous au nom de ma commune. Et je les remercie beaucoup.
So thanks to Frexis, I can be here, and thank you very much for that, also for the ability to be able to speak here today and be with you.
Et pour revenir sur la question de Catherine, et donc... je peux dire que la sécurité alimentaire, tout tourne aujourd'hui sur le changement climatique, si je peux le dire. Parce que nous, notre zone, notre pays, ou bien précisément ma commune, c'est une commune qui pratique l'agriculture et l'élevage. Donc, avec l'insuffisance ou la rareté des pluies, donc ça donne un mauvais rendement à la fin des récoltes.
So I'd like to say that for me, for my community, food security and climate change are very important topics. In my municipality, agriculture, or people live from agriculture and livestock rearing, and that's very much affected by climate change, for example, to the shortage of rains and all of that.
Donc, comme je l'ai dit, c'est une commune qui pratique l'agriculture en grande majorité et l'élevage. Donc, vu les deux activités pratiquées dans ma commune, et après les récoltes, on a un faible taux de rendement. Donc, c'est dû aussi au changement au changement climatique qui donne ces faibles taux de rendement.
So, as I said, my municipality lives from agriculture and livestock rearing, and we see that harvests are declining. So we having less harvests, and that's due to climate change.
Oui, parce que c'est toujours sur la question de la nourriture, de la sécurité alimentaire. Donc, comme c'est un pays qu'on a seulement la saison de pluie, sur les 12 mois, on a seulement 3 mois en temps normal, 3 à 4 mois en temps normal dans les années antérieures. Mais aujourd'hui, avec les changements, donc on a seulement 45 à 55 jours de pluie pour la saison de pluie. Ce qui fait qu'il y a une grande différence entre la production avant et la production d'aujourd'hui.
So in terms of food production and food security, what I'd like to say is that before we had a rainy season of 3 to 4 months, and these days it's only 45 to 55 days of rain, which means that obviously harvests and agriculture production is suffering quite a lot.
Et donc, si le temps est court, vu le changement, donc on ne peut pas avoir le même rendement.
So obviously, as the time is quite short for the rainy season, we can't have the same level of harvest.
Et donc, à cause des changements climatiques, donc le rendement a changé. Et maintenant, quand il y a un faible taux de rendement, donc on a un grand nombre qui attend, qui n'a pas de manger, qui n'a pas quoi faire. Donc, qu'est-ce que ça entraîne? Donc, ça entraîne à la recherche des gains faciles, à la recherche du travail facile. Donc, quand les jeunes partent à la recherche de ce travail facile parce que ils n'ont pas à manger, ils n'ont rien à faire, donc quand on cherche un travail facile pour avoir de quoi manger, ils sont lancés dans tout genre de tentatives de combat, de conflits.
So, as I've been saying, yields have been declining quite a lot. People don't have enough food, they don't have income, and due to that, especially with youth, we see people looking for new sort of opportunities to gain income, and that can then also lead to sort of negative coping strategies such as engaging in illicit things such as combat groups and these kind of things, because they don't have jobs, they don't have opportunities.
Oui, mais je peux continuer?
Un petit peu, mais après...
D'accord. Mais moi, je peux dire, d'accord, pour un peu condenser, que vraiment, avec nos nouveaux partenaires, parce que si je peux dire nouveaux, ces partenaires sont là à 1 an, et l'approche qu'ils sont en train de faire pour nous, je peux dire que ça a beaucoup amené un changement dans ma commune cette année, parce que c'est même les villageois, la population qui sont en train de dire ça, que vraiment cette année, il y a eu un changement à cause de l'approche de nos partenaires Frexis.
And what I'd like to say, for about a year, we've been working together with the Frexis project, and we've really been seeing in the municipality and in the village changes happening, and that's what people are saying, that they can see a positive change happening.
Oui, parce que si je peux avoir un peu de temps encore, je peux dire que avant, quand Frexis n'a pas commencé à intervenir dans ma commune, donc on a tout un tas de désordres et tout un tas de je peux dire même des tensions dans la commune. Donc, mais avec l'arrivée de Frexis, donc ils ont pu faire pendant l'année, la première année là qui sont dans ma commune, ils ont pu faire des diagnostics, ils ont pu amener les pauvres populations autour d'une table comme on est là, assis avec les autorités, les représentants du projet Frexis, donc pour discuter, et de là vraiment ça a mené beaucoup de changements dans ma commune, et ça, on a vu ça même pendant ces récoltes-là.
So as I said, we've seen positive change, and before there was loads of tensions and problems in the municipality, and so what they did starting, they did sort of diagnostic analysis and sort of joint processes with the local population, with the vulnerable groups and also authorities, bringing everybody to the table to look for solutions.
Parce que avant, je ne peux pas finir en 2 minutes, parce que pourquoi j'ai dit ça a beaucoup amené des changements, parce que quand du food security, ce n'est pas only ce qu'on voit devant nous, le manger seulement. Donc, food security, ça englobe tout. Et si c'est pas l'approche de Frexis à travers ces dialogues et les trucs qu'ils ont fait, et chaque fois on a les tensions entre les agriculteurs et les éleveurs, ce qui fait que même ce qu'on sème, on ne peut pas avoir la tranquillité pour faire les récoltes comme on veut, même avec le peu d'eau qu'on a. Mais ça a amené beaucoup de changements.
So what I'd like to say, food security, that's not only the food, the food you eat, you see in front of you, but it's much more. And for example, I'd like to highlight things like conflicts between farmers and herders, and that you need solution for that. And you need to do that to then have food security.
Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup, Madame Maire. Merci pour la traduction spontane, Anna. So, vicious circles between food insecurity and conflict, and you outlined how food insecurity can lead to this insecurity on the ground. But I'm also curious to hear how, of course, food insecurity is tackled by food systems innovations, and how can this be maybe more context conflict sensitive? So the other way around. Madame l'ambassadeur, c'est à vous la parole, et we're curious to hear how you look at things.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me here. And you switch it off. My experience with food security is so long that I'm afraid that in 4 minutes I won't be able to make it. So actually, you know, my interest for food security was triggered by insecurity and by conflict, because I wrote my first book on green power and red peril. And it was about a Carter's embargo when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. So I looked into all, you know, the inside and the linkages and so forth. Of course, it wasn't my specialty because I'm professor of international law and international relations, so I had to go deep into all this. And then I wrote my dissertation about world food security as a concept here in Paris too. So what I would like to do in these very few minutes, it's just for a couple of examples, I will do it the other way around, as you wished, just to give a very, very quick point which could trigger two kind, you know, of to ease tensions and conflicts. One is, of course, about prevention, which is absolutely basic. You cannot build sustainable security without prevention. And here the first point is I would like very much to see much better training of our idle youth, which is an easy prey to recruiting of organized crime and of the terrorist groups, especially in our context in Africa, since you wanted to hear about Africa, how to preempt and prepare them to get involved in real life, to get an income, to rehabilitate a domain which is absolutely vital for Africa and so forth. So you can, you know, hit many, many birds with one stone by getting this youth and the vulnerable groups interested in agriculture, in food producing, and all the related aspects. You have to take into account that it is not, you know, it's not attractive. It's a domain which, you know, was used for old people. It's not attractive. It's not trendy, and so forth. So we have to make this domain much more attractive, and I have a few other, you know, questions. So this is absolutely basic for prevention, and this is sustainable development. The second way is to train all the people who are, and you did say a word about that, in dialogue and mediation, to have a positive approach to conflict, to learn how to talk. And this, in Africa, we have a lot to do to settle the problems of land heritage, because it's a huge problem, and water sharing. And you know that the control of water is basic and central in the history of power and political systems. Another quick one is for post-conflict rehabilitation. It's absolutely crucial to initiate people who are on the ground how to handle the complexities and how to coordinate and make sure that this peace building can be sustainable. And I think this is important because people have no idea how to coordinate, how to go about it, because even in the international system, which I'm very familiar with, you have silos, and everyone is trying it to do. You have no dialogue normally between development people and security people. And I'm very heavily involved as well in security, as you know. I'm a member of the Leaders for Peace, and we try, you know, of course, to look into conflict before trying to build peace. So very quickly, more profoundly, there is a critical need for food systems transformations. This is absolutely basic. If you want really to secure some kind of food security in Africa, we have to change the systems, which means that it is an extremely tall agenda. But it doesn't mean that we have not started. it is key not only, to improve the capacity to adapt, and we have to adapt not only to climate change, to all the hurdles, to all the disruptions, and we have seen quite many since the COVID and its lasting effect, which have fragilized tremendously the societies, and which the upheavals of war in Ukraine, have just exacerbated. With the result, we have this. So the second lesson from the war in Ukraine, just to speak a word about present, is that Africa has to be less dependent. As President Kagame said, it's just unbelievable that millions of Africans should, be dependent on 10 million Ukrainians just to eat. So this is our basic problem, how to improve things to make sure that we can eat by ourselves. How could we achieve, such a miracle? First of all, to try to harness all these complexities. This is probably the worst thing for food security. It is, as you know, trans-sector question, and you depend on everybody, but you still have to have some kind of control. So you have to harness all these complexities, not only on the global level, and try to address, the changes, the climate change and so forth, but to address the specific local needs of the populations, which at the end of the day, they need just to eat. And just to be sure that the right to food, that means a lot to all of us, is met somehow. So this is an extremely tall agenda, as I said. So in that respect, as you know, there is not one Africa. We are probably 54 Africas, as many as the countries that it consists of, and this is our problem. But what we are facing is that, unfortunately, with a few exceptions, among which my own country, 80% of Africans are still dependent on imports just to eat. So this is a real problem. And how to reduce this dependency is a key question, once again, and sorry to. So, of course, integrated approaches, as you have suggested, are necessary because we are in the era of connectivity, but food security had invented connectivity even before, the connectivity of today, because you are dependent on one another, food, water, energy, just name it. I'm happy that you work on this nexus, because for my country we did it with Rabia Mokhtar, that you might know as well. And, but what we are trying to do, in that respect, in Morocco, I did say a word in our meeting, on team, is that we try even to go much beyond. And this is in Morocco, but we intend to expand it to Africa. We have created a green, blue, women-oriented rural economy foundation. And what we are trying to do is we are trying to build up an ecosystem where all the stakeholders talk to each other and exchange, but bring their experience. For instance, we're having University Mohammed VI Polytechnic in Ben Grir, which is conducting research. We put it with the start-uppers who want to create, entrepreneurs, with the farmers, with the women, with all the NGOs who are very, very, very strong in Morocco. We have this chance. And all these stakeholders are closely coordinated by local authorities to produce products which are eco-friendly and which can be sustainable. So once again, we want really to lift out of desertification and isolation huge territories which are becoming deserts because it's not raining. Drought in Morocco has been terrible, this year, but for quite a long time. And we are lifting out of poverty women, and a whole ecosystem is participating to really transforming the landscape and the country. So we have started, we have had a couple of successes, and we hopefully will expand this, this experience as well to Morocco. From Morocco to the global level, I have the honor to co-chair with Mr. Haile Mariam Desalegn, from former Prime Minister of Ethiopia, the Malabo-Montpellier Forum, which itself is supported by the Malabo-Montpellier experts of 17 specialists. You in Germany, you know that, because our partner is von Braun, the celebrity, you know, in that domain. And we have 17 experts from Africa and from all the other part of the world, with the Imperial College involved as well. And what we are trying to do is to bring innovation into the transformation of this system. And we are building as well on the best practices of the few countries in Africa to upscale and adapt for the other countries. The other countries, of course, will adapt themselves, the best experiences, which means that Africa is learning from Africa and that we are staying at the same time global and local. And this is our target. So this means as well that we have to change crops to adapt, because it's not sustainable to go on doing crops that we do not eat and have to buy what we have to eat and so forth. This means that you have to work on eating habits as well. And this is extremely high on the agenda because of publicity, branding, you know, the youth and junk food and all this stuff. You know, you really have to get out of this system, which do penalize the whole thing. We have to make a better use of data. This is crucial, but to bring it to the farmer and to the practitioners, not just big data, which is very, very attractive, but to the people who are on the ground and who need it to see what should they do, when and where, and how they should do it. So this is very, very crucial for us as well. Smart technology, of course, is I'm so sorry to say perhaps motherhood that everybody knows, but unfortunately, you know, we have to recall these necessities and make sure that they are really disseminated on the ground on the people who are doing this. Smart technology, especially for water saving, because water is the problem. Because the paradox, and I don't want, you know, to go too much on that, is that we are having in Africa all the paradox, you know, and contradictions. We have 60% of the arable land, but still we are producing 10 tons per hectare, which means the lowest productivity ever, and you cannot meet. So we have both to see for quantity, to face, you know, and quality, to make sure that people are getting the food they like and they want to eat, but at the same time, which is eco-friendly and will accompany, you know, all these things. So a lot of other things that we probably can say later on, or to answer questions if there are any. Thank you for your attention.
Second round. Thank you very much for the inspiring word. And if I may add, it's very much a long-term angle. This is a transformation, as you called it. It's a path out of dependency that needs to integrate elements of dialogue and of coordination. So Rebecca, online, yeah, super. Rebecca, of course, you come from the World Food Programme, so of course you are multi-mandate, you do many things on the short and medium term, but of course, if you listen to these very inspiring long-term elements of what's needed to counter food insecurity, how do you look at this with your main, of course, focus on acute food crises and your work, and what have you learned also from your cooperation with CIPRI on bringing the peace-building issues on the agenda of your work? Rebecca, please.
Thanks, Catherine. It's lovely to be with you. I'm sorry I'm not in the room. I'm kind of in the room, but I'm speaking to you from Ecuador. And I have to say, it's a good day to have this conversation. This morning, we have released from the World Food Programme the Global Operational Response Plan, and the predictions there have gone up even more than the numbers that you are acquainted with. It looks like the number of acute food insecure would grow to 349 million this year, potentially. So this is super worrying, and I think the conversation on the integration of peace and food insecurity is timely, and we have a lot to learn, but a lot also to act. Within that 349, almost 1 million are facing famine. And this is really quite terrifying if we look over history, how this has grown and escalated. I'd like to pick up, Catherine, if I may, on some of the points of my previous panelists. Caroline kindly referred to our work and, of course, mentioned South Sudan. And I think that's where we need to start, is to really look at, well, what's changed when you start to integrate food and peace? We know that it is important. We know the connections. But one of the key things that we've seen in terms of success is asking the right questions. You know, our leadership in South Sudan realized that pockets of famine have been plaguing the country for many years. It's not the same as, for example, Somalia, where you have large communities. But in South Sudan, IPC 5 or famine-like conditions arise all the time. And so he asked the question, what should we have been doing 10 years ago to prevent this? And this is exactly what Her Excellency said just before me in terms of prevention being key. But just asking that simple question caused a complete rethink of the program. And so I just want to just touch on a couple of things, because I think that will provoke a discussion on the solutions, which is really important. So in South Sudan, asking the right question meant that then the World Food Programme had to go into those areas where there was food insecurity, but also high levels of insecurity. This is different to our usual approach. We have been quite safe. We do not always go into areas where there is security. And of course, with the Nobel Prize, it's an indication that we work mainly in conflict countries, but programming in locations where there is a combination of both requires a great risk appetite, it requires boldness, and it requires a different type of partnerships. And then secondly, understanding the context. Madam Mayor and also Caroline also mentioned how important it was to consider the needs of populations. What are the root causes of insecurity, and what are the root causes of food insecurity? And when you look at that and unpack it, your program and your response changes. It is not the same way that we traditionally do business. And here we found that in this particular occasion, we had to rethink our program completely and offer a different type of support. It was about cattle, it was about livelihoods, and we had to partner differently with local NGOs who had expertise and to work across what I would say are the partnerships involved in the humanitarian development and peace domain. Her Excellency before me said that it's not often that development actors speak to security actors. Absolutely right. And the same way that humanitarians often don't speak to development. But that importance of integrating within on the programmatic side and bringing pieces together, but integrating externally in terms of our partnerships is critical if you're going to see a reduction in food insecurity and a reduction in insecurity. And then finally, maybe the issue of timescale. Often we have a very important reaction to save lives. But if we're going to change lives, it requires a longer time. And you need to do both together and converge, but against a greater time frame. So one of the points that I wanted to share is that there are so many opportunities where you see that through food insecurity, you can start to reduce both food insecurity and security. And the numbers are important. 70% reduction in conflict in these programs in South Sudan. Abductions that 2 years ago in 2020, it was almost 700 people were abducted. This year, 21. That 21 is still bad, but that's a significant reduction across a 2-year time frame due to a program that Caroline was referring to. So I think that the time is to bring this into scalability and replicability into other countries and really change the way that we're thinking. We face challenges. It's not easy sometimes to be working in this type of a setting or in this way, partly because of our mandate. And it's not about WFP, for example, starting to work directly on peace. No, our expertise is in food security. We are able to set an enabling environment for peace. But the key is the partnerships with those who have the mandate, the expertise, and supporting those national authorities in a way that really speak to their people. It's about changing our risk appetite and also our systems and our structures to adapt. And it's also about recognizing that food insecurity is not just a sector. It is part of health, it is part of nutrition, it is part of the food system that was sent before. So perhaps I'll just stop there and happy to take questions.
Rebecca, thanks a lot. Thanks for the open words and sharing your experiences from WFP. And I think stuck to me this one line, saving lives is one task, changing lives is another one. So that was, I think, something that really boils it down to how long-term, short-term needs to come together. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Dirk Assmann to also share some of GIZ's experiences beyond the Frexus project, where we heard some elements already of in tackling these questions and overcoming silos. Dirk, please.
Thanks a lot, Katrin. But before entering in that question, just one remark to His Excellency, Madam Ambassador, when you were saying that Africa is dependent of crops from just 2 countries, I thought, well, Germany was dependent on natural gas just from 1 country, so it's the same story. But that's another story. Well, yeah, as Katrin already told you, GIZ is the German arm of the government concerning technical cooperation and international cooperation. As such, we work worldwide with our partners on almost all sectors that are relevant for our partner countries, so developing countries, emerging countries. That's nothing new, but what has been changed during the last, let's say, 10 to 15 years, that 2/3 of our operations take place in fragile contexts, has been doubled within this time. And like you, we have a very long history in tackling the food and nutrition issue. And for the last 50 years, since the beginning of GIZ, we are working on that field. And we still have a very large portfolio addressing food and nutrition security. So it has been always a very important sector. And there we are doing all this, well, the work most of us, I guess, know, like sustainable food production, natural resource management, value chains, agri-trade, etc. We also support improved access to healthy food for vulnerable groups through social transfers, for example, like cash for work or school feeding, insurance schemes. And we improve nutrition knowledge, behavior has been mentioned as well, and practices. For instance, one very important issue for us is addressing gender biases in intra-household food distribution. And since I am not only Director General of the sectoral department, but also the gender ambassador of GIZ, I'd like to underline the importance of gender issues in general, especially in the field of food and peace. So these are our traditional approaches that we implement for almost 50 years. Now, during the last years, something changed, and many of the current projects are implemented in fragile contexts. Of course, as conflict, we've heard it from CIPRI, the main source of food insecurity. So also before, we didn't start it right now with the Russian war in Ukraine, but also before, the worldwide effects, armed conflicts, had a lot of impact on food security. We all know that. Just two examples, Ethiopia, Somalia, where parties involved in the conflicts use the food and hunger as a weapon. That's unfortunately nothing new since the beginning of the mankind. It's used like that. And now COVID, the pandemic, and climate change, of course, have made the situation much worse. Well, what's new for us is normally we focus as a technical cooperation organization, we focus on mid and long-term solutions. But what's new for us is that during the last, 10 years more or less, short-term measures became more important, like cash transfers or fertilizer distribution, seed distributions. But of course, We do it, but it's not our goal to come back to a country each year again to do the same. So we are always, of course, looking for sustainable solutions, and then there the mid and long-term solutions come back into the game. So it's like climate-resilient farming methods, or supporting cooperatives to diversify and bolster food productions. So in recent times, however, these measures we combine with measures that come from other sectors, like social cohesion, or due to the impact of conflicts, local peacebuilding initiatives to strengthen the foundation for peaceful development. So, during the last years, the combination of food security and local peacebuilding became more and more important in our work. And there, it has been mentioned as well, conflict resolution mechanisms like committees between farmers and herders in Mali, or joint planning between returnees, IDP, and host communities in northeast Nigeria became more important. So one, maybe the most important lesson learned, it's necessary to combine those traditional, let's say, food nutrition approaches with other topics like social cohesion, climate adaptation, and of course peacebuilding measures. And well, we always try to join our efforts wherever we can. And I'm very happy to have you from the World Food Programme here, because now we have let's say a joint commission. Our donor BMZ has commissioned BMZ and the World Food Programme to address food security and social cohesion in a complementary approach. And I think that's only one example, but it's a very good example where international bilateral organizations can work together to bring together their strength. But however, we see still a huge potential to integrate food security and peacebuilding approaches to a greater extent, and that's our expectation or wish to governments, to donors. Firstly, we should link peacebuilding much more systematically to sustainable resource management. Secondly, we should leverage work on food systems such as agricultural value chain development to foster constructive, positive relations between different groups of society. And thirdly, we need to address more directly existing power structures by promoting dialogue between key stakeholders on government issues, with the private sector, with the civil society, and about key democratic principles. So my conclusion is, given the often cited multiple crises, we need more integrated approaches. We must strengthen the peace-building impact of food security program, and we've heard Fraxis might be a very good example. If you have more questions about it, now it's the advertising. Here our project manager sits there, they can get more information, and we have a stand here in the project space. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Dirk. Thank you very much. So, Peter, you've heard now from research, the two issues need to be better combined. We've heard also from the analysis of probably 54 Africas, but also with a specific focus, of course, from the example of Niger. And we've heard also from both humanitarian and development, we do see the need. And I'd like to pick up, since we didn't have any pre-prepared questions, I'd like to pick up on one word that Rebecca was saying, the risk appetite. Because this is risky business if we do that, you know, if we both want to achieve something on the food security side, but also see how can we contribute to peace building on the local level. We may fail it's not an easy task, but still I think we have to keep our ambition and continue working towards that. So from your policy perspective, how do you look at this? And what about more risk appetite, which is something in the fragility and conflict community, at least we've been talking about for a long time, and we still are asking for more risk appetite, in particular for these difficult issues. So, Peter.
Thank you very much.
Close yours.
That's a challenge, but no, but I'm happy to take that up. Now, a lot of the structural issues have been mentioned by the previous speakers already, and so let's come to the risk appetite to some degree. The risk appetite, to begin with a kind of a conclusion, also requires partners for us who provide money, who take risks, and who are not, as we saw in many cases in Ukraine, who are running away when the situation is heating up, and whom we then have to convince heavily to come back and address the challenges at stake. So that is a problem for us because we are not implementing as EU. We need partners who are there, who are on the ground, who are taking risks. Secondly, I'm in the comfortable situation there because indeed the specific instruments that we are in charge of at the foreign policy instruments are small. They are very limited budget-wise, they are very limited time-wise, but I'm allowed to take bigger risks, and we are doing it. Some of it that we are doing, that we are trying, that we are testing, is, you mentioned it, I come back to that in a moment, fragility, where we are substantially also financially contributing, but we're also taking the risks by doing new things. We're doing for the first time in the current, through the Russian aggression in Ukraine, aggravated food crisis, we are investing in infrastructure in Moldova to allow, while the Russian sea blockade continues, to have a higher share of food being exported. For us, that is a risk because it's really for us completely new territory that we intervene with that kind of measures very upstream. Unfortunately, we are forced to do it here. And of course, we would also have appreciated if then partners, when the grain was out of Ukraine, would have started to buy it and not started to bet on the market improving during quite a while. From that, maybe very briefly, and with the World Food Programme, we are working there, developing. It's about to be kicked off in two, in this respect, fragile regions, Burkina Faso, Niger, developing programs where we're trying to really find out at the local and regional level what is it that we can do that the current food crisis does not further aggravate existing pending conflicts to become virulent again. I think that is under preparation. We will have to see what exactly we will be able to get out. I am optimistic because, and that's now not flattering, but I think with the Frexus project where GIZ and us are in jointly, and the mayor spoke about it already to some degree, I think we are able to show that, I'm not sure whether it's risk-taking or whether it's just going to the root causes, that you can tackle the things. Because, of course, yes, you need all kind of voucher systems, etc., fine. But if you want to tackle the root causes, and if I look at what I understood is happening at the Frexus program, and I hope I can visit it in January also myself, some of it is, it's an area that has always been quite significantly structured by competition over land issues, water issues, so you mentioned it all in your introductions already, regular famines, and a lot of governance issues. And it might sound weird, but the project going down to really that local level and facilitating dialogue between certain communities and diving deep into some of the challenges, having there really social agreements between communities, agreeing that the authorities supervise and support rather than hinder the implementation has really helped. And there was indirectly already mentioned that allowed, it's very small, it's regional, it's one or two, but it allowed to unblock the construction of certain water wells for herders, which had been blocked before for more than 10 years. And that is a contribution. Not sure whether it's a risk-taking one, but I think in the overall approach, yes, because we are trying to show that if we really go deep, we can help making a difference. However, and there we are into many of the issues, and there I'll then end, because we are into the buzzwords of the nexus. We are into all the potential or not potential conflicts with humanitarian aid, which I'm still on the theoretical level somehow grasp, and at the practical level struggle to understand. But I'm relatively new still on my job. But a few points still very briefly, which are important in such a project context, which is risk-taking. That means we also need quite intensive, also from our level, then on the project partners, and then further down, monitoring of what is really happening, because it has to be specific. And there are lots of, notably in a conflict context, interactions and discussions necessary. Secondly, they have to be long-term. Yes, we have to sometimes quickly tackle something, but many of these issues you will only be able to address if you build trust and if you go into it. And then I think three buzzwords which had come up, but which have to be looked at in that context, maybe probably more, are demography, productivity, and education. I think they came in the presentations, but with everything that we are trying at risks or not risks, we also have to continue working in a very structured manner on these elements, because otherwise we're not moving out of the current situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. I look at the time. To me, it seems a bit we had a kick-off here. Caroline, I hope you are happy that actually people sitting on the table probably already try to implement your recommendations. But I still think there's still a long way to go. I wished we could move to another room and speak about failures also, because as we all know, we learn from failures quite a lot, and to dig deeper into these lessons learned on the practical level. And I also wished that those who continue negotiating on the global level issues around food security, that we see, just as we've seen in the run-up of the previous COP, that now, I remember 2015, that people were saying, how can COP be so conflict blind? How can the Paris Agreement be so conflict blind? We are now in 2022, and it seems that at least on the COP, a lot of these issues of peace and security and the linkages are entering the room. And so I don't know, to me, maybe to finalize this question, I think from listening to all of you, it would be a great push on the policy level if the conflict blindness of some of the global food security debates would also move towards more of a direction of being more context and conflict sensitive, in particular based upon the research, the data that we have, and these experience that are on the ground. So it feels that this should be a next step to move our debate into very practical failures and lessons learned, but also move our debate to a policy level to also strengthen the linkage there. With that, I'm really sorry, no questions. We have this hour for one room. This is PPF rules and regulations, but thanks a lot to PPF for really putting this together and inviting such fascinating people. 1 minute I give you, and then they will throw us out, but 1 minute, and Anna, please, the final translation.
That's right.
Merci beaucoup, Catherine. Donc, pour finir, je voulais remercier tout le monde ici, les partenaires qui sont là, mais je tire aussi l'attention des partenaires et quand ils veulent venir en aide au niveau des collectivités dont nous sommes, nous voulons qu'ils partent au fond. Qu'est-ce que je veux dire qu'ils partent au fond? Qu'ils partent jusqu'à la source, jusqu'aux vulnérables, jusque dans les villages pour voir la réalité. Je ne voulais pas qu'ils s'arrêtent au niveau seulement national. Donc, de faire comme l'approche que Frexis avait fait. Si je peux dire, parmi tous les partenaires qui interviennent, c'est Frexis seulement qui a pu faire l'approche là pour aller jusqu'aux villageois, jusqu'aux vulnérables là, pour les écouter, pour entendre de leur bouche c'est quoi le problème, qu'est-ce qu'ils veulent, parce que si on sait ce que tu veux, que quand on t'aide, ça va beaucoup te bénéficier, t'apporter du plus, quoi. Et donc vraiment, je voulais que les autres partenaires aussi fassent comme l'approche Frexis. Et c'est pas ça seulement. Donc, vous pouvez aller.
Yeah, I'll try to that. Yeah. So thank you very much. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, everyone, for being there. And what I just like to say to close to the partners is that if you come to my country and trying to support us, please go down to the municipality level, a bit like the Frexus approach. Don't just stay at the national level. Please go down up until to the village level to really look for the problems that are there, down to the sort of vulnerable populations, and then look what the problem is, because only if you look for the problem, then you can find appropriate solutions, a bit like the Frexus project does. Thank you very much.
Pour finir, madame. Minute, pour finir. Oh. Parce que c'est important ce que je veux dire là.
But I think the point of being on the local level